Okay. All right. Okay. So we started last week discussing the differences between Sephardim and Ashkenazim. We spoke last week. What did you say? Louder. We spoke last week mostly geography. I mean, so to speak, how the Torah moved to different locations and different Minhagim got established with different areas, and how Mamela different tziburs got their rules. Now, I want to continue that topic today, and where I want to end up is with the Shulchan Aruch. So let me explain. I'll start with this. There's actually a auction next week, I think, from Ashkenazim. You know, they auction all the old Svarim and etc. And they have a Shulchan Aruch that's being offered now. A first edition Shulchan Aruch, from the first batch that were published, in excellent condition. And the starting price is $250,000. And we should all exactly. And the Mevinim hold that a Shulchan Aruch in such good condition, a first edition Shulchan Aruch in such good condition, will go for over $1 million. Now, why is that? For the simple reason that there's not too many of them left. Because this Shulchan Aruch was so well adopted and so well used that almost none of them survive. Now, that's a Shulchan Aruch that has just the Mechaber in it. The first edition Shulchan Aruch is just the Beis Yosef, just the Mechaber's Psakim. A first edition Shulchan Aruch that has the Hagayis Ramah in it, the first edition that the Ramah has published it, the volume of Aruch Chaim is probably a handful. You can probably count on one hand or two hands, under 10 that still survive in the world. And the reason is because the Shulchan Aruch, together with the Ramah, that was used by, that has literally everything in it that everyone needs, was used so hard that none of them exist anymore. They're not around anymore to 400 or 500 years later. So the Shulchan Aruch is the sefer that takes all these different chilufim and hagim that we know about based on location and codifies them all into one book where everyone could find what they need for their halachas. The Sephardim will follow the Mechaber. We say the pasuk l'chul Yosef, you follow Yosef. And Ashkenazim, we know the pasuk, we say B'nei Sor Yotzim biyad Rama. Rama is the Ramah. And Ashkenazim will follow the psakim of the Ramah, and Sephardim will follow the psakim of the Mechaber. So I just want to, unravel how we got to the Shulchan Aruch. That's such a document, a sefer that anchors everybody, and the controversies that were involved in crafting the sefer. So let's go back for a second. We spoke last week that every location developed its own minhagim and its own halachas, and over time, as they lived separate from each other, so every kahila had its own rules. So now there's a din as follows. There's a tshuva from the Rivash that's quoted that's quoted all over. Everyone brings this tshuva from the Rivash. The Rivash brings down from a sefer called Mishpatei Hacherim LaRamban. The Ramban used to be printed in the back of Masechta Shavuos. I don't think it's there anymore. I don't know where it is today, but the Ramban used to be in the back of Masechta Shavuos, where something called Mishpatei Hacherim, where the Ramban wrote, rules of Cherim, and in there's rules of Minhagim. So he brings over here the Kasav Ramban Zal, the Mishpatei Hacherim, Shekein Hadin b'chol Kabbalas Harabim. This is the halacha with all Kabbalas Harabim. Shechala aleim v'al zarom. It's chal on them and on their children. Kedashkhan. And this is a great raya. It says the Kedashkhan b'Kabbalas HaTorah. Meaning, Be'etzem, Klal Yisrael, the dar that was in the midway, that was in Mekabel the Torah from Kadosh Baruch Hu, fine. So they were Mekabel themselves to keep the Torah. What does that have to do with us? What does that have to do with all their children, the Torahs that come after them? So says the Ramban, we see from there that obviously, when a group of people, a Kehila, is Mekabel upon themselves, Hanhagis and Dinim, so they Mekabel them on themselves, V'al-Zaram, Kedashkhan b'Kabbalas HaTorah, V'chein b'Megillah, Yitzaimis, the Rabbanans like Megillah Esther, the Megillas that we have, or the Tainesim that we fast, even something that they didn't have an official get-together where everybody agreed with, and Mekabel this din is the halacha. Just, it's a minig that arose, a custom that arose in a location that was built, that arose just to prevent people from coming to Yisurim. Says the Ramban, children are also mechuyev to adhere to those gedarim that the fathers agreed upon. Now, what's his raya? So there's a Gemara Psachim. The Gemara Psachim, Daf Nun Amud Beis, brings as follows. It says, B'nei Baishan, the children of the city of Baishan, came to Rav Yochanan, and they asked him as follows. They said, Avoseinu our fathers were makbid not to travel mitzor l'tzidan on Erev Shabbos. The location of tzor l'tzidan is obviously doable on Erev Shabbos, but the people of Baishan decided that they don't want to ever find themselves in a situation where they could be on the side of a highway for Shabbos, so they don't travel from tzor to tzidan on Erev Shabbos. So the children of Baishan came to Rabbi Yochanan and they asked Rabbi Yochanan, Ma anu, what about us? Do we have to keep the same halacha and not travel from tzor to tzidan on Erev Shabbos, or are we allowed to travel from tzor to tzidan on Erev Shabbos? So says Rabbi Yochanan answers them, he says, Avasanahu Efshalon. They told him, Avasanahu Efshalon, Ananda le Efshalon Mai. Our fathers were able to adhere to this chumrah. It was okay for them, but us, we're not able to adhere to this chumrah. What should we do? Amalu, he told them, Kar kiblu alein avesechem. Your forefathers were makabelit for you already. That's what Rabbi Yochanan tells them. Rabbi Yochanan in the Gemara Pesachim says, your forefathers were makabelit for you. And the pasuk says, Mishlei, don't forsake the Torah of your forefathers. And says the Ramban, good raya, if the Avos did not have the power to accept the minhag, to accept the halacha for them and their children, if it wasn't within the rights of the Avos to be makabel for their children, so then how can you tell them, it's not my problem. It's their halacha. It's a chumrah my father had. What does that have to do with me? Elamai, says the Ramban, that just like we see from Kabbalah Satira, that the Torah that Klal Yisrael makabel themselves is for them, for deiris, it's for them, for their children to continue. So too, in every area that it arises, every halacha and every minhag that arises in a tzibur in an area, is aleim v'alzarim. They're mechuyev, their children are mechuyev to stick to them and Minhagim and their psakim, even after the forefathers are gone. So this is the Rivash. The Rivash quotes it. It's a famous Ramban. It's brought down in Shulchan Aruch. This din that a Kabbalah Satzibur, a minig, a halacha, a psak, is to be imposed on them and their children l'deiros. Now, I happened to have came across something interesting. I don't know if it's really the Maisa, but Abul Chanan in the second volume of Kevet Shurim has something called Kuntres Divrei Seifrim, about the Rabbanans, about the potency of the Rabbanans. It's a lamdish shtickle, it's not a halacha shtickle, but in there, Rabbi Chanan brings the Rambam that we spoke about last week, where the Rambam writes about the whole ishtal shel satira, how the Torah was passed down from the Gemara to the Ga'inim, to different tkufas in different areas, and there were batei dinim in all different areas, and one bezdin is not allowed to be kaifa another bezdin in another area to follow its rules, right? That's the Rambam we spoke about. So Rabbi Chanan brings that. Rabbi Chanan says a very interesting thing. He says, he has a dik in a Rambam, he says this is his chiddush. Rabbi Chanan says that he thinks as follows. The din be'etzem is that if a bezdin of Ayin Aleph, the bezdin of 71 that sat in the Beis HaMikdash, make a psak, be it on whatever matter it is, a takana, a psak, a gzeira, they make a psak, and comes along a chacham gadol who lives somewhere else, who might be much bigger than them. He's bigger than all of them together. The biggest, Talmud Chacham, the biggest place that comes makes a psak, keneged the bezdin hagadol, so the halach is he's chayav misa. It's a din of zakin mamre, that even a zakin, even a grace Talmud Gadol Adar who makes a psak keneged the bezdin hagadol shbushalayim has a din of a zakin mamre. So says Rabbi Chanan, that din that a bezdin hagadol 71 zakin mamre, so that has limitations. It only applies to psak that bezdin makes if they're sitting in their place in the Beis Hamikdash. It's exeris hakas of the Gemara. Sanhedrin darshans it that when bezdin's in their primary location, they have these abilities to make these rules, and anyone who argues in them is now in violation and will be called the zakin mamre. Says Rabbi Chanan, that's good by bezdin hagadol, because bezdin hagadol, at the end of the day, it's a tiny miyuta of the Chachmei Yisrael. He says, imagine in the times of the Beis HaMikdash, there must have been 1,000 Chachamim who were royal lahira, who could paskin a shayla. 10,000 Chachamim who could paskin a shayla. And of those, 71 of them, a tiny sliver of them, sat in the Bezdin HaGadol. So says Rabbi Chanan, it's a tremendous chiddush that 71 people could be kaifeh every other Chacham in Klal Yisrael to agree with them. Let's say if 1,000 Chachamim disagreeing with them, and these 71 hold like this. So says Afapikin, the din is, they're all not allowed to argue on Bezdin. Says Rabbi Chanan, that's a chiddush for Bezdin HaGadol Yerushalayim, that 71 people could be kaifeh, the whole tzibur, to follow them at the penalty of death. And if you don't follow them, it's called a zakin mamre. But he says, nearly, and he has a diak like this, that if Roiv Chachmei Yisrael, b'chol makim shehem, if the great majority of Chachmei Yisrael, in whatever area they are, pass a rule, or paskin a halacha, or impose a gzeira, it has the same taikif as a Kabbalah Bezdin HaGadol. So he adds like a big oomph to all minhagim and psakim and halachas that come from an area. Meaning, if you take a Sephardim minhag mashal that happened, developed in Spain in 1250, and Roiv minyan of the Chachmei Amakim of that area agreed to it. Says Rabbi Chanan, it would have the din of a psak of Bezdin Agadol. And likewise, if you have a psak that comes from the Balei HaTosfos, let's say, and most of the Balei HaTosfos, the Grace of Balei HaTosfos agree with it, Rabbi Chanan would hold it has the din of a Bezdin Agadol, which is a big chiddush. Now, incidentally, the Chazon Ish and his brother-in-law, the Stipler, have a correspondence back and forth with each other based on this Kuntres Divrei Seifrim. With the Chazon Ish did not like what Rabbi Chanan writes in Kuntres Divrei Seifrim, and he has like many kashas, and the Stipler, he addresses the letter to the Stipler, and the Stipler writes back to answer him a lot of these questions. But one of the things that the Chazon Ish takes offense to is this chiddush that Rabbi Chanan saying, that a psak of Rei Binyan of Chacham would have the din of Bezdin Agadol, and the Chazon Ish holds that it's Shalei Ladina. So, either we have the Ramban's level, that it's Medina, that a father can be Makabel Minhagim for him and his children, or if you want to take it to the next level, that when a tzibur in an area is Makabel something, it has the din of Bezdin Agadol. B'chalev and Shia, it has a tremendous chaymer that children and deiros that follow after the day before them should adhere to the minig and the psakim and the halachas of their forefathers before them. So now, for hundreds of years, Ashkenazi Jews lived in Ashkenaz, and Sephardi Jews lived in Sfarad, and each one of them developed their own body of work, of Rishonim, of Parshanim, of Balei Halacha. They each developed their own whole signon of learning and their whole psakim. And the tzibur in that area knew very little about the tzibur in the other area, or of the rabbanim in the other area, and they followed the halachas and the minhagim and the takanas of their rabbanim, their gzeiros, their chacham, their batei dinim. Now, it happened that the time of Ashkenazi Jewry breaking down and of Sephardi Jewry breaking down happens be'erach at the same tkufa. Over, a span of 150 years between, call it the late 1300s till 1500. So, in Germany, after the Black Death, they blamed the Jews, and there was pogroms, wave after wave after wave, and slowly Jews all moved out of Germany and moved to Poland, Russia, Lithuania, where most of us come from today. That's where Ashkenazi Jews went to. And in Spain, in 1395, we know of the Girush started in 1492, when all of Spanish Jews was kicked out in one shot. But really, the Christians started to reconquer Spain in the late 1300s, and as they marched up Spain and conquered it, or actually down Spain, as they marched down Spain and conquered it, wherever they came across Jews had it rough. Christians didn't like Jews. Wherever they came across them, they had a hard time. And slowly, Sephardic Jewry moves away from Spain also, and moves to many different locations. To North Africa, to Turkey, to Amsterdam, Germany. It moves to all different locations. So now, in a tkufa of great upheaval, when a great tzibur is moving from where it's been for hundreds of years and establishing themselves in a new place, is when it becomes very important to write down the rules. Meaning, you're going to move to a place where you don't have yeshivas, and you don't have a Bezdin, and you don't have Rabbanim. It's going to happen, it's going to build. They were moving to different locations. It became a very important chayvas hashah to write down all the halachas as we have them. Every tzibur felt it was very important to now, okay, so what are our halachas on Gans Torah? How do we fear zich in regards to everything? Now, so in the Sephardic world, there was a group, you call it, that was working on it. In the Ashkenazic world, there was a group that was working on it. Now, let's start with the Sephardim. So the Chida actually in Shem HaGedolim, the Chida writes that there were three Yosefs who were Roi, that they should have the crown of writing the Shulchan Aruch, the Beis Yosef for Klal Yisrael, to organize and codify all the halachas for that segment of Klal Yisrael. It was Rabbi Yosef Cairo, the Mari Teitzak, and the third one slips my mind the second. And says the Chida that he has a Kabbalah, that the reason why the Beis Yosef was chosen to be the one who should have the schos to transmit this Torah to the next Torahs was machmas his great anava, because the Beis Yosef is such an anav. Hashem chose him with the schos. Now we also happen to know that the Beis Yosef in his Sefer Magid Mesharim, which is his Sefer from his Seder Halimud with the Magid. The Beis Yosef had a Magid, a malach that he used to learn with, and he published a Sefer called Magid Mesharim, which is all, set up Parshi Satira, and it's all the learning that he did with Magid. And in there, the Magid tells him that this Sefer, Beis Yosef, that you're working on, this big work that you're working on, Beis Yosef, it's going to be very niskabel, umisham teitzitera. Everyone's gonna get from this Beis Yosef. So, the Rabbi Yosef Kara, the Mechaber, was destined min Shemayim to deliver this capstone to take all the Torah of the Tkufas Rishonim, organize it into one sefer that Ganz Klal Yisrael could have it, and this is something that the Beis Yosef was zeicha to do. Now, on the other side, miles away, was the Ramah and his cousin, the Marshal. Both of them were also in the attempt at organizing. They were from the earliest, they were from the first few dairies of Chacham in Poland, and one was in Lublin, one was in Krakow, and they were both trying to organize the same thing. They were trying to organize all the halachas of the Tkufas Rishonim that came before them into a set of svarim. Now, the Ramah was much, much younger than Beis Yosef, and the Ramah started his work, but never finished it. And let's see how that develops. So I just want to we'll unpack it by going through some of the hakdamas that the Mechaber and the Ramah write to their svarim. So the Mechaber is hakdama to Beis Yosef, which is really where all the teichen for the Shulchan Aruch is. Right, the Beis Yosef is the long form of the Shulchan Aruch, and the Shulchan Aruch is just the cliff notes. Meaning, eventually Shulchan Aruch develops into a tremendous book with Mefarshim, Adein Shir, and it's a lifetime's work to go through it. But the way the Shulchan Aruch, as the Beis Yosef published it, as the Mechaber published it, was a small book that was just the cliff notes to his big sefer Beis Yosef. So now, the Beis Yosef in his Hakdama writes as follows. He says, Klal Yisrael came from where they came from. They passed down halachas. He says, today, if someone wants to come and know the halacha of any topic, so what should he do? He says, in Yomer Adam, that I should start from the Gemara and the Mefarshim, V'apaiskim Kulam, Yechpat Hadavar Lav Ma'id. It's a tall task to be able to tackle a sugya from the beginning all the way through to the halacha. It's too hard for everybody to do that. So he says, and even us, we wouldn't be able to do it if not that we were zeicher to the Mefarshim, Rabbi Yerucham, the Rambam, Girsayis, Maggid Mishnah. He continues, Rashi, Taisvis, Rif, Rosh, Ran, Mordechai. It's too much for someone to be expected to go through all of those svarim to get to the halacha. So he says, and if you're going to tell me, Yomer Adam, Livcha B'Sifra Kitzurim, so a person will take a Sefer HaKitzur, he'll take one of the svarim that shorten the work, like a smak or an agur or a kolbay. So he says, that's a good idea, but how do you know if you're really getting the real halacha in every area? Gambi Mokaimis, they bring one paisik lahater, b'lisham chaylik, they don't bring any opinion that arguing on it, and really kol gedei Yisrael chalkim va'isrim. So you're not going to get the real halacha, you're going to get one man's version of what the halacha should be. He says, Al Kain, Ani Hadal Ba'alfa Yisrael, very humble, because of his Riboy Vanava. Al Kain, Ani Hadal Ba'alfa Yisrael, Merein Rav Ephraim, and Rav Yosef Kai Rozal. Kenesi Lashem Tzavakus, I took it upon myself, I was Mekanaf HaKadosh Baruch Hu, V'na'arti L'sakel HaMasila, and I was maskim to carve the path, so to speak, to carve the path for everybody. V'eskamti l'chaber sefer kol adinim, and I will be mechaber sefer that has all the dinim that a person needs in his daily life. It says, first I thought to be misakin and I'll say there Rambam, but then I decided to be misakin and I'll say there Rosh. I'll say there Hator. I'm sorry. I'll say there Yaakov and Rosh the Torah. Now, so he says I bring all the paiskim, and I went through. He lists or who he's been through to quote it. He says Talmud and Pirush Rashi, V'taisis Varan, Rif, Rosh, Mordechai, Rambam, Maggid Mishnah, Ben Yerucham, Sefer Trumas, etc., etc. He says Nimtza, that someone who's going through my sefer is able to encompass all of those things in one sefer. He says, I wasn't sure how to paskin. There's many machloksim. There's endless rishonim on every topic who argue, and many shittas. He says, I wasn't sure how to paskin. How do I decide who to go with? So he says as follows: L'chein hiskamti b'daiti. I made up in my mind. Ki lehayos shloishes amudei ha'hira. There are 3 pillars of hira. Shebeis Yisrael nishan aleim. That the Beis Yisrael is supported by them by hirasam. Halayhema harif, harambam v'harosh. The 3 amudei ha'hira that the Beis Yosef says are the Rif, the Rambam, and the Rosh. Amarti alibi shebamakim sheshneim mehem maskimim. Anytime 2 of them are maskim, l'dei achas nifsek halacha k'moisem. A simple majority. There's 3 main primary contributors who are the paiskim for the dar, and memela, anytime you have 2 that agree, I'll go like them. He says, and what if you don't? So then he has it's a different way. But for the by and large, the Beis Yosef sticks to this, and it will be based on the Rif, Rosh, Rambam, and it will be based on a Rav, 2 of them. Now, I want to read you the Ramah, the Darkei Moshe's Hakdama, what the Ramah writes. And it's actually a little sad what the Ramah writes, but listen to what the Ramah writes. The Ramah writes that I sat down in my dar and I realized very similar. He starts off that the dar needs a book, that could put everything in front of them, and it's too hard. People can't just learn from the Gemara and the Sefer Kitzurim. Says the Ramah as follows: Ubehigia Torah Esther, when Esther's turn came, Ratzalemer Issa v'Heter, Esther Rashi Tevis, the sugis of Issa v'Heter. V'eschalti hilchas chala, I started writing the halachas of hilchas chala. Achazani plotzis v'levshani chalchala. I was overtaken by tremendous angst. V'shami Ner Yisrael Rosh HaGoyla, when I heard that Ner Yisrael, the Rosh HaGoyla, the God Ladar, Ari misvacha ala Hashemayim v'ruach le'in kadishin v'chiber sefer beis Yosef. When I heard that, I was beat to it. That the God Ladar Yosef Cairo from Tzfas already put out the sefer that I'm trying to put out. Asher kol royev yoidin es ma'alasei. Anyone who sees it knows the ma'ila of the Yosef Cairo. Zois tuvay v'royev teiv hatzafim bekir boy. Oz nivalti shepoyel harik pa'alti. I became so disheartened that all my work was for nothing. V'shigiyasi l'rik l'vahala and v'shinasi b'china mimenu gazalti. I stole my sleep for nothing because no one's going to need what I'm going to write anymore. And then he says, who's going to pay attention to what me, small Ramah, writes, connected the words of the Beis Yosef? And a small candle in the middle of daylight doesn't make any impact. So what's the point of all my work? And then this is like amazing to see the Ramah write like this, like his feelings. He says, I spent many days trapped in this called depression. And I call it like this depression. I was not, my heart wasn't at rest. I was melted like water. Until I davened HaKadosh Baruch Hu Lemer, like Esav tells Yitzchak, Habracha achasi l'cha avi. Do you have one more little bracha that you could share with me? Let me also have a chelik in this transmission. So that all my hard work shouldn't be something that just goes to Geniza. It says, and then I strengthened myself and I went back to work, and this is the product that I'm prepared to bring. It's going to go in tandem with the Beis Yosef. Instead of being an alternate, my own version of a Beis Yosef, I changed it and I'm going to write in tandem to the Beis Yosef. He says, and what are the contributions that I'm going to make? What am I bringing to the table? He says, ha'echad is that the Beis Yosef is a big mayrach. He takes a very long time to say everything, and I take a short time to say everything. So that has a benefit for itself right away, that I'm just going to, whatever he says in 2 pages, I'll say in 2 paragraphs. So that's right off the bat. Then he says, Hashenis, she'isafti al dvar of kama v'kama. I added a tremendous amount of additional Mar Makaimis. Uparatzi negba v'yama, b'divrei Rishayim, I added divrei Rishayim, v'achrayim, halil l'kim pesrayim. Says I added a tremendous amount, like later Chuvas, and then here's his punchline. He says, Hashlishis v'ua ikr. The third contribution that I'm bringing to the Darkei Moshe, that I'm contributing to the Beis Yosef, and this is the most important one, he says, Hu atachlas ha'mavokish, ki yadua, he says, she'rav mechaber Beis Yosef, b'tivay ala gedolim nichsaf. He ran just to the gedolim, meaning the Rif, the Rambam, and the Rosh. He ran to the biggest, to the gedolim, upasak halacha b'chol makam al pishnayim v'shleisha edim, and he passed either like 2 or the 3 of them, either 2 or 3 if they all agree. Hema ha'goyim and achmadim ha'rif ha'ram v'rosh. And he says, and what he did with that, what he ends up doing by default is being seiser all the minhagim that are in the places that we come from. Rubam are banei on a different klalim sak, which we'll address in a second. And we chalila to be mefakvik after the dvarim of our paiskim, like we saw from the Rivash and the Ramban, that the Kabbalah is aleim v'alzaram. And I write by each thing as they fit me. This is the minhag, not like the Beis Yosef. The time of inemuki and my reasoning is with me, says the Ramah. Now the klalim psak that the Ramah is referring to is as follows. There's a riff in the last parak of Eruvin where the riff says as follows. The riff says the din halacha kebasra. The din is we paskin like the later one. Now, B'atzim, it's a big chiddush, because we know that we look at Rishayim and Achrayim, we always look upwards, right? That we're nothing compared to the Derek that came before us. But in Psak, there's a halacha that we pass in Kibasra. Now, the Rosh, in the end of Eruvin, on that riff, explains, and he says as follows, he says, it's Pashal Cheshbon. He says, of course we believe that the Rishayim were much bigger than us. But he says, the Rishayim, the one who came first, never heard or saw the words of the one who came after him. So we don't know if he would have been swayed by the arguments or the rayas of the one who came after him. As opposed to the Basra, the person who passed me later, he saw what all the Rishonim had to say, and Afal Pikein, he felt that he had rayas or svaris that led him to have a different psak. So we assume that Mistama, if the Rishon would be here, he would have been swayed by the Achron's convincing argument. Now, obviously, there's cutoff points, and we don't say that we should argue on a Ramban, because Mistama, if the Ramban would be here, he would have liked my svar and he would have changed his mind. Right? Of course, there's cutoff points, and there's norms, how far up it could go. But that's the din of halacha k'basra, and that's how the Rif and the Rosh paskin, that we should paskin halacha k'basra. So says the Ramah that to paskin like the Rif and the Rambam, Keneged, all these other later tshuvas and minhagim that I have, is a steer in the Rif and the Rosh Alein. You're not paskin like the Rif and the Rosh themselves, because they would say not to paskin like that. So says the Ramah. Now, the Ramah has a very gentle and humble style of writing his critique of the Mechaber and the necessity for his Darkei Moshe to run in tandem. His older cousin, the Yamsha Shlema, the God Ladar, was much more sharp, had a much sharper pen. The Yamsha Shlema wrote in a much more sharp way, and I'll just read you a few of the Yamsha Shlema's Hakdamas that he writes in the Hakdama to Yamsha Shlema. The Yamsha Shlema is again here for the same reason, and I'll read you here, like something he says like this. He says, the Beis Yosef brings, he calls him Hasvardi. No, he says, so Hasvardi am la'olam tzedkei divrei mechabrim human Hasvardim. The Svardi will say, always if it's written in a Svardi sefer, the Svardi's right. V'frat devei Rambam, shu mu'ulam michal mailis, and for sure if it's in the Rambam, which is taka, a wonderful sefer, Pnimius, v'chitzonius, v'chol chachmei tzerfatim, and all the Balei HaTosafos, the French Gaonim, kiklipas hashum negder, just like a peel in front of them. They don't count at all. V'shari le'mari, and that's a terrible mistake. It's not true. And then the Marshal has a way of, he attacks the Rambam afilu. Like he writes that the Rambam instructed his son to learn Chumash with the Pirush of the Eben Ezra, and the Eben Ezra barely knew how to learn, and he brings lots of rayas that the Eben Ezra barely knew how to learn. It's like he when he comes, he takes out everyone in one shot. The Eben Ezra, the Rambam, the Beis Yosef. He says, he says, and not only that, like you should know better, Svardi world. You should know better because the Ramban didn't do that. Asher kasav aleim b'dina degarmi. He writes as follows: V'chachmei tzerfatim asr ruben alamon heim hamoyrim heim hamalamdim heim hamagalin lanu kolever. He says the Ramban writes about the Ashkenazi Rishonim, the Balei HaTosafos, that heim hamalamdim heim hamoyrim heim hamagalin lanu kolever. They're the one who teach us everything. V'afshay Svardi hikar emes. Even though he was a Svardi, he recognized the truth. And he praised who was worthy of praise, like Maishas Rambam. And then he continues. He says, to find you the place, it's all full of this. And rather the Ben Ish Chai in the Hakdama to Shut Rav Pa'alim, if you want just a Malcolm to look afterwards, the Ben Ish Chai in Shut Rav Pa'alim is so offended by this. He's writing it 350 years later. He's still so offended by he finds this Hakdama so offensive that he does to the Marshal what the Marshal does to the Rambam and Eben Ezra. He goes and finds every place where he feels the Marshal made a mistake, where he feels the Marshal is Shalei Ladina, and he says, look, you're no better than the people you're being Ma'ashem. You're saying that they make mistakes, you also make mistakes. And meaning the tone of the Marshal he finds that inspired them now. So the Marshal writes over here, I'm just looking for it. So in here he writes that he gets to the same point as the Ramah, that the Mechaber prioritized the psakim of the Rosh, the Rif, and the Rambam, and by doing so, he neglects all the psakim of the Gedolei Ashkenaz, the Balei HaTosafos, and all the Gedolei Ashkenaz, and that is unacceptable to someone of Ashkenazi origin who is mechuyev to follow the Minhagim and the psakim of his Bezdin and his Rabbanim, and therefore I also feel the need to write my own book, and he does not write it as an addendum to the Beis Yosef. He writes his own, and the Yam Shlema, but it's not written in a format that's so conducive to learning Halacha Maisa, so we know that the Ramaz, addendum to Shulchan Aruch is what was the Skabel more. Now, I just want to show.
The Marshal, they dovetail each other?
Yeah. The Marshal is about 30 years older than the Ramah. They're cousins. The Marshal was very angry with the Ramah. The Marshal has a very harsh style of writing. Meaning, of course, we don't know anything about the Marshal. It would be silly if I was talking about Marshal's personality, obviously. But Marshal from his chuvas, you could see he has a harsh style of writing. He writes very, very strong. You find that there are plenty of guys who write very strong. The Marshal was considered mamash the God Ladar. He was much older than the Ramah. He had a big yeshiva. A lot of the Talmidim, the next star, his Talmidim. He's mamash. from the primary Meir Derech, Meir Drachim.
You've just experienced another Torah class brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.